Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Schneeberger. I'm the programming chair of the Direct Marketing Club of New York. And I can't say enough about everybody's gracious giving of time today, panelists included, having today's topic being the next billion-dollar industry, consumer data onboarding. I'd like to tell you a quick anecdote about today. We've had lots of communications go out from the club to generate today's attendance. And this is the first time I received several calls from individuals talking about their excitement about this topic. Usually I get an email or so, but I actually had phone calls coming back to me talking about how cool it was that we were addressing this topic and that they were going to enjoy today's session. So I think that speaks volumes to an engaged audience here today. So again, thank you all. So data onboarding is currently a $250 million business today, and it's projected to get to $1 billion by 2020. Tremendous growth in a very short time. So what I'd like to do is quickly let the panel jump in here. I think, Bruce, you were going to do a few slides first, as I understand it. So I'd like to just give you a quick overview of who's going to be speaking today. From LiveRamp, we have Anneka Gupta, co-president. LiveRamp offers brands and companies identify resolution that is integrated throughout the digital ecosystem, providing a foundation for true omni-channel marketing. Chachko, CEO of Throttle. Paul's been a formative member of the data and tech community for over 3 decades. And Throttle is a people-based data onboarding company that enables brands to accurately reach customers online. Whitcher, VP of Product of Oracle Experience and Data Logics, is now part of the Oracle company providing marketing infrastructure for the data-driven era of connecting digital advertising to offline sales and helping leading brands reach audiences of buyers across display, video, mobile, and social. And finally, tying this great panel together is Bruce Biegel, Senior Managing Director at Winterberry Group. Many of you are familiar with Bruce as our kickoff January luncheon speaker who ties us all together. And he mentioned in January a particular slide about data onboarding, and here we are talking about it today in depth. I'll ask Bruce to come up in a moment, but Bruce's responsibilities at Winterberry Group include strategic and business planning, financing and M&A, global multi-channel marketing, technology development and support, legal coordination, and financial management. I'm going to ask everybody today to please join me in welcoming Bruce Biegel, and then Bruce will bring up the panelists.
Thank you all. I don't actually do all that stuff, but I take it really well. So what I'd like to do today, before I bring the panel up, I'd like to just run you through a couple of background slides on the onboarding industry. And it's really great to see this many people here at a luncheon in early October. So really pleased, and thank you DMC and Y for having us all in today. Let's see not to screw this up. So when we start to think about what's going on in the market, onboarding has a role to play. The consumer today constantly changes their devices, changes their direction. We have a very broken customer journey. And when we first started looking at the market a couple of years ago, we were looking at around 2 devices a person, then it became 3 devices a person. The stats that we're seeing now is the market, people have about 8 devices with device IDs per person. We have one of our managing directors who's a bit of a technology buff, and we counted 22 devices because he has his light bulbs wired, and NAS, and he has 2 tablets, 2 laptops. They have a collar tracking on his dog. So like, you know, the number of devices, you don't think about it. Your car is a device now, your television is a device, the set-top box is a device. And unlike your home. So once upon a time, it's like, I knew you lived there, but now if I'm going to follow you, you didn't throw away your home every 3 years based on your lease being up, but many of those other devices are getting costly. So there's this constant renewal that goes through. We had one home address, we have an average of 3.5 email addresses. So again, multiple data points tying back to a person. So it's gotten harder and harder to say, who are you? And the amount of data that each of those devices creates, and every interaction you have between yourself and a brand, both generates data from you to the brand and from the brand back to you. And this volume of data just keeps increasing. So all of a sudden I've got massive data, I've got a load of devices. How do I understand where you are and where you're going? When somebody authenticates and they log in, we have a pretty good idea from your PII who you are. You're a customer, I know who you are, I have a way to communicate with you. When people haven't logged in or authenticated, it's a much bigger challenge. Or if I want to reach people in their anonymous state, how do I do that? And I think that's really where the market is headed, because that's still the majority of interactions. Throw on top of that all of the technology. We were looking at some of the numbers. Campaign management systems. There used to be a handful. Then there were 100 that were counted at the end of 2015. There were 160 this spring. So we've had 60 new platforms for managing and activating data and having customer communication. So the number of platforms that are being used outside have complicated all of this. Some are customer data platforms, or their campaign management, or their digital orchestration, or their personalization. All of these need to be fed, and they need to be fed in both the PII environment as well as the non-PII environment. So, nobody's got a picture. Everybody's got parts of it. Anneka has parts of it, Kevin has parts of it, Paul has parts of it, but when locations change every minute, when the data changes so frequently, it's hard to have that single customer view that everybody talks about. That persistent 360-degree view, very, very difficult to assemble. So an attempt is made, and we say, all right, what can we do to understand what people are doing, where they're going? So, onboarding. There we go. For those of you, just a very quick couple of points on this. In the onboarding process, we take data that is known, PII, and we match it and link it to cookies in an anonymous environment. And then we push it out for activation, usually through a data management platform, but not always. And that could go and connect to a demand-side platform or any number of devices for targeting. It can also be used on a website for those people who have not authenticated. But it's a fairly straightforward process. But sometimes, in some use cases, you may say, you know what, I need this to go through my marketing service provider. I need someone else to anonymize it. Maybe I don't want to give my brand's data to Facebook. And I want it to be hashed before it goes into that environment. So I can go from my CRM environment to a database service provider, to the onboarder, to the DMP, to the activation. All of a sudden, this starts getting, there's a big change. And it sounds simple, and that's like a really easy slide. Really easy to draw. It's not so easy to actually activate this and make this all work together. So I've asked the panel to get together and come up. So I'm going to ask everybody to come and join me now. And we're going to talk about some of the use cases, from digital display targeting to walled gardens, analytics and insights, addressable TV, site personalization, etc. Where is this market? Why do we think this would be $1 billion market? And that 250 was last year. So we know it's a whole lot more, because that would just be Anneka's budget now. All right. Could you please welcome Anneka Gupta, Kevin Whitcher, and Paul Chachko. Because if we start off, if you could each give a little bit of the background of your companies and what they do in onboarding to start us off, and how you got into onboarding. That would be great. And Anneka, I'll start with you.
Okay, sounds good. So we got into we were one of the first onboarders along with Data Logic, where that came from, back in 2012, 2011, 2012. And where we started is we worked with a lot of different data providers, list providers in the industry who had data that they were selling in the offline world for direct mail marketing, for email marketing. And we saw this opportunity to help connect that data into the digital ecosystem, into platforms like Wukai and other data exchanges to help those companies monetize their data assets in the digital world. And that's really where onboarding was started and how we got into it. Over time, at that point in time, if you look at the matrix of how much data you could actually connect from your original files and original data into the digital ecosystem, it was somewhere between like 5 and 10%, which was really low. So it was very hard for a marketer, let's say a retailer or financial services company, to actually use onboarding for their marketing purposes because they just could not get enough scale. So over time, like we went from servicing data providers to getting into brands, to start working really with everybody in the ecosystem to help connect their data together across the offline and digital world. And then in the past couple of years, we've made a lot of investments to grow beyond onboarding and really address the entire consumer identity problem in the marketing ecosystem. So Bruce talked about this a lot. It's like, how do you actually get a complete picture of who a customer is, what they're doing? As a brand, brands want to bring all their first-party data together. They want to layer on top second-party data, and of course, they want third-party data as well. And so that's the bigger problem that we're trying to solve at this point, and that's where we see the evolution of onboarding going.
And Anneka has now been made co-president as of about 2 weeks ago.
Great. Yeah, so as Anneka mentioned, we go way back in this space, and we have roots in
You guys are
exactly.
going to have to hold the microphones because people in the back are having a hard time hearing you.
So
If
we
get
actually.
feedback, we'll sort it out.
Okay. Our roots are in direct mail, and we started, there was a predecessor to Datalogics called Next Action that was a cataloger using all of these lists, and to the point that Bruce made, when you're receiving an address or sending to an address, that's relatively straightforward. What Datalogics did is recognize that the world's moving digital, and so onboarding was really the seed of that business. That's really how we created the business that we've got now. And what that ultimately did was add a dimension, and in those days it was really one dimension, it was cookies. So we went from having a very straightforward graph to now we have a couple dimensions. And of course, now to the point that Bruce just made in the slides, devices are growing rapidly. And the only thing permanent is the device is not permanent, the cookie is not permanent, even emails are not permanent. The only thing permanent is the person. So it's crucial in this onboarding space to be able to tie back to that person, to be able to connect the devices, the emails, and watch that over time longitudinally. As you know, I'm sure all of us in this room have Hotmail addresses and Yahoo.coms and the various things that we use. Those are still important because I still log into some websites that way, but that's not my active email address. So there's another dimension here of active and reachable. Where are people today? Even if you have to recognize them on the address that they got in college 15 years ago.
Paul?
I don't know why I always find myself in a position of competing against billion-dollar brands, but I do. I got into this space. I mean, a lot of you guys know me from B12 Group. I ran B12 Group, ran for years. And we entered the space about 6 years ago. I think we are actually your first third-party data provider. So
Possible.
It's true. As well as Newstar. And You know, we were really successful at V12 syndicating data. We were on 180 different platforms, selling tons of data in the space. And about halfway through that experience, 3 years, 4 years in, I thought I could do a better job at it. And so within V12, we started building the capabilities of onboarding. And we took a completely different path than these guys have done. My view, or at least Throttle's viewpoint, is onboarding is a data-centric game. It's really not about technology from the onboarding perspective. The art of matching a consumer one-to-one deterministically comes down to data processing and matching data. The technology comes from the distribution, the connectivity piece, the analysis of the data. So from a Throttle perspective, we're sort of creating the second generation viewpoint of onboarding. And data onboarding to us is, let's take the brand's data, let's bring it in, brands, measurement companies, risk management companies, data providers, whoever it may be. And let's make sure the data they're giving us first is accurate. Let's make sure their data is standardized and up to date and has all the holes filled in. Let's make sure that we have not just one email address associated with the brand's file, but multiple email addresses associated with the file. And that discipline is more data-centric focused versus just taking a brand's data, putting it into the system, matching it, and sending it off to a destination. And all three of us up here, as well as the New Star folks, and anybody else who gets in this game, you know, one of the core competencies to ensure that that match is deterministic is using a consumer ID graph, which we're all rapidly building. And Bruce talked about it, and Kevin just talked about it. And an ID graph, just to step back for a second, is not a marketing file. It's not a database that we all have, the whole entire US population with 1,500 fields of information. That's a database. We all have that. We all understand what that is. What it makes it a graph, and what makes the validation in a deterministic match, and you actually do the onboarding, is surrounding that data, each individual within that file, with a persistent ID. And we all have it, right? We all have an email address, we have a social handle, we have mobile numbers, we have mobile IDs, IP addresses, home phone numbers. And these are all IDs that every one of us in this room, every person in this country has associated with themselves as a personal ID. So the graph has to take advantage of associating and triangulating all of those IDs back to the individual at the top, that you can then associate all the attributable data, within that person's record. That graph is what you really use as the basis to onboard effectively and deterministically. Anneka just mentioned that they're doing it. That's where they're building to. That's where Oracle's building to. We started that way, and I think that's what New Star is doing. So I think from how I got into the game, that's how we sort of entered the space.
Got it. Okay, so technology's great, talking about data's great, but people spend money to tie it to business outcomes. They tie it to data use cases. And what's interesting to us is, why are they doing this? What are the primary data use cases that are involved? I had a list of them up there. What are your customers doing? Why are they onboarding? So let's start with the why, and we'll start with Anneka again.
Sure. So it really depends on the sophistication of the brands that we're working with. On the very sophisticated side, what we're seeing more and more as the dominant use case is really being able to pull data together from every engagement and touch point a brand is having with their consumer. So that could be ads that they're showing on TV. That could be someone calling into their call center to get support. That could be people visiting their website or mobile app or walking into their store. And what the most sophisticated brands are trying to do is pull all that data together, tie it back to the person, then understand the entire customer journey to purchase, and enable a much more relevant and meaningful interaction the next time they engage with that customer on whatever channel they're engaging with that customer.
How many brands would fall into that sophisticated category?
That I would say is probably, let's say top 30 brands are really doubling down and going. There's a lot more that are looking to do this as well as part of bigger digital transformation strategies. As you go down market and into the less sophisticated brands, what we see is that most people are still, the very core use case that brands are leveraging is onboarding their CRM data and their point of sale data for digital targeting. Bread and butter use case, it's kind of what everyone starts with, and then they build up the stack from there.
Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with that. So starting sort of at the base, onboarding is step one. It is a means to an end, and the end is going to vary based on what your objectives are as a brand. Having said that, what a lot of people are looking for is like, look, I understand who my customers are on the website. I understand who they are maybe in the call center, but I need more swings at bat. And that's where digital targeting comes in, and that's the sort of easiest one. We can take that same file, we can associate back those people to the other IDs, to the other emails, and now we can reach them on Facebook, we can reach them on Pandora, we can reach them wherever they are on the internet. So you get many, many more swings at bat of talking to those customers that are important to you. So that's sort of the real basics.
Are you seeing an increase in the number of customers who are approaching you and say, we'd like to onboard before we go into the social systems?
Yeah, and you sort of alluded to this early on. There are a lot of people a lot of brands who are reluctant to sort of hand their file to Facebook or to anybody else for that matter. And we see a lot, they have, all of these social platforms have built tremendous walled garden advertising systems. And the ability to reach people there is really vital. And that's another level of translation, that's another step, another dimension in the graph that we've all been talking about. So being able to activate and actually use that data is really crucial.
Are we using onboarding for Amazon as well, as that has started to take off?
I would say like what's causing brands to, that top 30, I think is now rapidly expanding. And I think that's in large due to what Amazon is causing here competitively. So everyone needs to compete with Amazon. And being able to compete with Amazon means you need those tools. You need to be sort of leveling the playing field of being able to reach those consumers with all of the data that a platform like Amazon's got.
Paul?
So there's a lot of use cases. These guys have covered brands, but you also have the other side of the continuum where you have measurement companies, you have risk management companies, and a lot of those companies want to do things like lookalike audiences and make sure that the panels that they have are accurate, they understand who's on the panel, they're able to reach those folks on the panels, or in the case of risk management companies, they want to make sure fraud prevention is taken care of. And using an onboarder that has at least an identity graph is sort of a second emerging product line. We all start off on the onboarding side, and we built the graph to make sure we have accurate onboarding. But another use case now that it's emerging is using the graph as a pure product versus an onboarding product. And so a lot of folks like device ID players, they have the understanding of what a device is. They may have a hashed email associated with that device. They have no idea the who behind the device. And so if you have the who behind the device, then you can start targeting better through the mobile platforms, as well as when you start looking at geospatial stuff and all that kind of stuff. You start to understand who's behind the device that's driving by a billboard, that's sitting on an Audi lot, or whatever the use case there is. So I think the use cases are still developing. I think on the brand side, as these guys said, the top 30 are maturing, and with respect to the top 30, probably top 100. For everything that Anneka said is absolutely 100% true, but my experience so far has been, and it's limited, granted, they're all building their own proprietary graphs. They're not relying on each of us to build their graph. They're relying on us to provide them access to information that goes back to their individual graphs. And every brand will have a proprietary graph that's built off of some part of us, but off their own data as well. And I think that's where a lot of the expansion is going to happen in this industry. We don't know where it's really going to go, but our data being accurate, their data being accurate, being the provider, the tip of the spear of the identity resolution behind that device or behind that cookie, then going back to their brand and being actually accurately associating the impressions, the opens, the clicks, the transactions, back to the individual record with their own proprietary graph accomplishes what the holy grail of all this is messaging to transactions.
So Paul, after 6 years of being in digital data, what do you think is the most mature? Anneka spoke to display targeting, but after display, what comes next?
Social targeting. I think Facebook and Google, as we all know, is dominated, and they're not going to go anywhere. I think all four of us in this industry, and if you want to add device ID players, you want to add the other two guys in the space, We assist brands, at least on our side, getting into Facebook, getting into Google, and expanding their audiences, again, using the graph as an identifier of their customer, providing them more information, so as they go to put their data in those two walled gardens, they have more success matching accurately. So even though we compete with them on 20% of the business, right? About 80-20, they still are utilizing us for help to get into those walled gardens. So I think that's probably the second part of the mature side of this business.
Kevin, what is your thoughts on what you're seeing? What's maturing? Where are you seeing new use cases starting to evolve? Is it site targeting? Is it addressable TV?
Yeah, so I think site targeting is definitely there, but what I think is really fascinating, and this is a bit of a back to the future moment here, is you know, direct mail was the original addressable media. And then of course digital came, and it's like, holy cow, now we can do this everywhere. And what you see now is that TV, which has been around for years but has been bought, frankly, very bluntly, is now recognizing the power of being addressable. So instead of buying on, you know, DMA and demo, and by the way, like a loose guess at demo, you can now address, you can understand the person, the attributes, the household that you're actually addressing in addressable TV. So that's the space I find to be really fascinating, and certainly not mature, far from it, really emerging.
Anneka, your maturity watch?
Kevin stole mine as well. It's TV, but not just addressable TV, really all video, and it's all becoming addressable, it's all becoming programmatic. A lot of these really interesting, or the big programmers, the big broadcasters are starting to really think holistically about how they sell their advertising space omni-channel and how they make it all addressable. And so I'm super excited to see how that's developing and how more data can be brought into those decisions.
All right, we talked a little bit about the brands, we've talked a little bit about the data companies and the risk companies. What about the publishers? Paul, you want to start with publishers? What are they doing in this space?
You know, obviously Viant protects the timing ecosystem. And Viant is really a provider of selling media versus onboarding. They're onboarding for that specific space so they can sell more media into the space. But I think the publishers right now are starting to understand that they need to know who their visitors are as well. They need to start getting the identity behind the people that are going in there, getting more information, so as ads are being brought over and as information is being brought over, they have a much better handle on their audiences and who their viewers are. So I think, you know, I don't think they're rushing to the game, but I think they're slowly coming into the game. And it will probably be a crawl, walk, run sooner or later, probably within the next 12 months. Right now you start seeing them inching their way forward. So.
Do you think this is part of private marketplaces and that they're using onboard data to help catalyze their private marketplaces? On it? You want to comment?
Yeah, I definitely think a little bit. I mean, there's different types of publishers. There are publishers that have come from the more traditional side of publishing that have sold a lot of advertising through their properties before and are trying to bring that into the digital space on their digital properties. And then you see a lot of these like new age premium publishers and social media sites like Spotify and Pandora and Snapchat, and they are approaching it from a totally different angle where they are starting to offer ad products through their platform. They want to be able to offer products that are competitive with Facebook. They're struggling to do that because they don't have the scale of data that Facebook has, and so they need other assets and proprietary data assets and access to lots of different data so that they can power advertising tools I think are as powerful as what Facebook has.
And that just gets back to the original comment. I mean, it's a data-centric business for publishers. They don't have the data to build their quote-unquote internal graph. Snapchat, you know, they have certain information on their users, but with that information, you need to do, as Anna said, grab a whole bunch more of information from folks in this room and outside this room, so they can build that graph. So when advertisers come to it to place media in a private marketplace, they can be a lot better at it.
Kevin, your thoughts on the publishers?
Yeah, I think what's fascinating is sort of the opposite of what I just said in the back to the future. With these new publishers, what you have are publishers that only understand mobile. which is a really interesting place to be. We all come from spots that started probably offline at somebody's house. Maybe we started online on a desktop on a cookie. These guys know only sort of to be able again to sort of help connect that in-app mobile persona. In this case, it almost feels like backwards, back to the person, back to the desktop is another benefit that we see publishers looking for.
Kevin, part of your background in Datalogics, you were early into attribution and measurement and partnering with Nielsen, Catalina, and others. Can you comment about the attribution use cases?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating one. I still manage what's called Datalogics ROI, our measurement product that we launched with at this point 5 years ago on Facebook and other platforms. And that's really what drove our need to have an identity graph, because it's very important to be able to connect in the earliest days of cookie to then an offline transaction at the grocery store, for example. And now, on a mobile device or an email or whatever it may be. But what we found very early on when we did the measurement is that the industry hadn't matured enough to a place where those connections, deterministic or not, actually made sense. And so what the measurement showed us is that when we tried to put all these things together without heavy data science, the connection didn't work. So the jump from home to cookie maybe was fine, but cookie downstream to something else was broken. And so that really is what kicked off our investment in the identity space and the identity graph specifically. And that was especially true for device IDs, for phones. It was everybody wanted to be on mobile. Not very many people checked for accuracy. And as a result of measurement and attribution, we could see immediately this is a broken system. We need to invest in the data science to make it right.
So are you actually fixing it?
Oh yeah, this is to the chagrin sometimes of our executives. We invest a lot in this. This is we have a team of data scientists who are really focused on making this as correct and as valid as we possibly can, and we check ourselves on that all the time.
Let me ask you a question. What's the highest accuracy rate?
No, I ask questions.
I've had enough wine with you. I can ask one. When we're talking about mobile ad IDs and the accuracy thereof, what is your opinion of the highest accuracy rate the industry can achieve today?
On the whole.
On the whole, just as an umbrella number.
I'd say what we found, obviously it depends on the source. There are highly trusted deterministic sources, and then there is we see a lot of quote unquote deterministic that is no way you're not getting my email.com. It's deterministic.
SU@fu.com.
That's right. Deterministic does not mean accurate. So it is vital to, as an industry, I bet we're, call it 50%.
So if you think about it, how many of us have devices that multiple users touch every day? So, me and my brother, or me and somebody in my office, a husband and a wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. So it's my opinion, and I don't have anything concrete to back this up other than some information that we've got from providers that we provide data back to. I don't think it gets higher than 75% ever. So if any of you guys go out there and buying data from a device ID provider and say, oh, our data is about 89% accurate, 100%, just walk the other way. Because it's not, it's one of those fallacies I think you need to uncover in this industry, that just some of this data is, and I've seen it. I've seen websites saying, we have deterministic mobile data that's 100% accurate. And it's just, I throw up. It's not.
And it was 100% accurate for how long?
It's never
at a moment in time.
It's never.
We've thrown around terms like onboarding and identity management. How do you differentiate the two? I know Axiom uses identity resolution instead of identity management. Could you do a little bit of the differences?
Yeah, so we use identity resolution, so we don't use identity management. So that
lecture on that.
probably from our marketing team. I think of onboarding as one piece of identity resolution. And even onboarding is a fuzzy term because back in 2012, onboarding was taking offline data and tying it to cookies and moving it into digital targeting platforms. Now we hear our customers, as much as we would say like, okay, that's what onboarding is, now we hear people talking about onboarding as like any kind of movement of data. And so I think the term has definitely evolved, and that's great. How we think about what we're doing now is that really the superset of moving data around and leveraging the consumer identity graph to do all this data movement in a highly accurate way, we call that whole process identity resolution. So identity resolution is not just the ID graph, but the enabled connectivity that you get off of the ID graph. And onboarding, I think, is, we kind of think of more as just the pipes or the connectivity and not necessarily the entire ID graph and what that provides.
Kevin, you are Mr. Identity at Oracle, so can you identify an answer?
Sure. Yeah, we also don't use identity management in part because it doesn't speak to the accuracy, right? Resolution is something we talk a lot about. And I think an important part here is understanding and Paul referenced this as well, the sort of science that's happening. You can manage things all day long, and getting it right, putting the effort in to validate and to make sure these things are right is really how we differentiate between management and resolution. And so we're very focused on that, but I think all of us sitting at the table are really trying to get to a place where identity resolution is sort of behind the scenes capability. What you all care about is accurate activation. So we're going to work hard on resolution so that you don't have to. And all we become is an intelligent provider of the connection to your consumer.
Paul?
So starting tomorrow, I'm going to stop using identity management at the office. We're just evolving as a business. So I only have one point to add to this, and I think everybody who's in this industry right now, who's working to get identity correct, you have to start from the notion of a graph that is individually based and not a household-based graph. It's my view that you can't accurately get down to an individual with all of the identifiers that you need coming from a household perspective. So if you start thinking about this, a graph has to be built from the individual level up, which is a completely different way of doing things in this industry. For years and years and years, we were all talking about household addresses, last name, all that stuff. But now, a C. Smith at an address could be a Charles or a Claudia, and therefore your identity is going to be completely missed if you try to do it from a household down. So from an identity resolution perspective, it's all about building the file from the individual level up. And if you don't do it that way, and you're not pertaining to it that way, then it's not going to work either way you look at it.
So effectively, onboarding is an application of identity management. It is part of that process so that you can now apply it to do recognition.
But I think this all flipped, sorry. It all flipped, right? Because over the last 5 years, that's not what it was. For the last 5 years, as this industry sort of built itself on the backs of these guys, it was, can we just match the hash email through traffic and make a match? And that's what got everybody going. But now it's maturing. It's just like the email business in 1999. An email address was good enough. All you cared about, it came from a sports site. And you'd start sending sports offers.
Especially for companies in Florida.
I was just gonna slap your hand for saying identity management instead of identity resolution. I like off of Paul's point, it's the identity graph is so much more than what it was in the onboarding days. Then we were talking about email addresses, we were talking about name and postal addresses, we're talking about all the different cookie IDs for every platform out there. Now, we were talking about how many devices people have now. Well, all of those devices have different kinds of identifiers. Some of them are mobile IDs, some of them are something totally different. And it's just getting more and more complicated. So identity is not, solving identity resolution, solving building this accurate individual identity graph is an increasingly harder problem to solve. It's not getting easier.
So thinking about back to our brands. Different verticals behave differently. We have those that come from a direct marketing background, that were always very performance-oriented and others that were very brand-oriented. Where are you seeing the uptick in terms of adoption by vertical? I'll start with you, Anneka.
Sure. So our kind of bread and butter brand verticals have been retail and financial services, probably because they have come from a world where in direct mail and email they were highly data focused. And so they've been the first, and they also have the highest scale in terms of number of customers. So we've seen them for many years now as being the ones that are leading the charge. Now what we're seeing is that those verticals continue, we continue to see adoption there. We're also starting to see other industries like travel, auto, media and entertainment is a big growing vertical for us. Technology companies, if you think about Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, like they are very data focused, but as Kevin was talking about, they're very mobile focused. And so they don't even have great omni-channel identity graphs, even though they have very high usage of their platforms. So these are all different kinds of companies that we're seeing starting to adopt identity resolution for a myriad of different use cases, not just in marketing, but across the entire customer experience.
Right. Kevin, given the way that data logics have been built, you would have a retail and auto bias.
Yeah, and
as
CPG.
you add in the blue kite components, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, what's interesting for us is that in the world of Blue Kai, literally everyone we work with we are onboarding. So we are bringing publishers' data on in order either to help them manage their own customers or to help them monetize their data. And that's one place we see a lot of growth, is everybody realizes they have data and they want to monetize it. The other thing, and I referenced this earlier, this is not new. Retailers have been, the sort of foundation of this for a long time. But there is a rapid acceleration because of Amazon of the sophistication, the use cases, can I do this, that, or the other, that from the retail vertical that I think is really spurring innovation.
Paul, what do you see?
Yeah, so we're sort of a young company, so any customer you bring is a spike in their vertical. So I can't really talk to that as much.
About 10 months old now?
Yeah, we made our first sale in March. But we've been doing this for 2 years. And this is the other thing, this is a really cool point. You can't jump into this business and hang a shingle and be in the onboarding business. It just doesn't work. It takes 2 years of maturity and scale to compete with these guys. I mean, if you can't go to a brand and say, we can match at a rate that they're at, then you're not even gonna get a shot. So we did a lot of stuff behind the scenes and quietly built it. And so yes, we've only just started selling. We're doing really well. But again, if we get 2 retailers or a spike, it went great. But there's an interesting development. Quick serve is a vertical that is just diving into this space. The McDonald's of the world, the Denny's, all those folks. I don't really have an answer why, but I think they realize that they need to understand who those customers are coming to their restaurants and be able to reach them locally, in a targeted way. And unfortunately, they stink at the data game, so they give you data that's really just really bad that you have to work on a lot before you can get it to a point where it could be valuable to them and they could start targeting. But I'd add quick serve is a pretty good vertical.
Yeah, I'm on the board of a restaurant data company, and what we have seen is they were late to digital, they were late to data, and now they are playing catch up because their market has gotten very, very competitive like the rest of retail. At least they don't yet have the Amazon effect, but with Whole Foods, who comes next? McDonald's.
I think what's really interesting in that vertical, and I completely agree, is you have these very sophisticated marketers who are not sophisticated in the data space. And so suddenly that opportunity to add data to the business is not only interesting, it is critical, it's imperative. And so they're playing a little bit of catch up.
Yeah, I'll just riff on this 1 second. If you look at McDonald's, you look at Wendy's, they all have mobile apps now. You can order your fast food stuff online, and all they're getting from you is an email. And the email, again, could be a garbage email. So that's their point of entry into the space. So taking that piece of information and creating a database for them, and creating a profile for them, and activating that audience and providing it back to them so they can actually hit that medium is a whole new game for those guys. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we're really seeing adoption across the verticals. If I'm a brand and I'm saying, all right, I'm not one of the 30, I'm not one of the 100, and most of those have tried it in some way, but if I am that next 40,000 mid-market, what are the considerations I need to be thinking about before I go into onboarding and get started? I'll let you start.
I think what's at the top of everybody's minds now is privacy, especially for
I was
anybody.
not going to use that word today.
You really can't avoid it, especially with anyone who's in the EU or has exposure to the EU. That has got to be sort of first and foremost. I think what's true today, as it was 7 years ago, is sort of scale. And reach. Who are the people I can scale and I can reach? But that was sort of the only criterion 7 years ago. And I think what's increasingly coming to the fore here is quality. And that's a place we've really seen brands lean in. At the end of the day, like I said before, at the end of the day, what you want is a accurate connection to as many consumers as possible. And so the ability reach can be misleading in that regard. It makes you think that you're reaching consumers. The only way you can really know that is to test it. And that's something we see a lot of brands leaning into, is help us understand quality.
So it's about getting in and test. Kind of policy step 1, step 2, step 3.
Just to riff on Kevin, it's quality, but it's also accuracy. And all they want to do is making sure they're hitting the right person with the right message. And if you're not accurate up front, what was your question?
Step 1, step 2,
Oh,
step
yeah,
3.
so-
I'm a brand. I want to get into
Yeah, so
I
it's
want to
really,
spend my money.
it's really funny. Every single opportunity we have, the first step is a test. It's a proof of concept. Send me a slice of your data, 250,000 records, and tell me what you got. Show me. So from our standpoint, we're completely transparent. We bring in the file from a client. We do all of our upfront work on the data processing side. We give them a report, tell them exactly what we did their data. Here's what we fixed, here's the holes we filled, here's what we appended, here's how much we extended it. And then we do the actual test, and we show exactly what we matched deterministically, what we matched in our traffic that's not deterministic, but still a match, so probabilistically. Then we give them recency, frequency, how many times we've seen them, when's the last time we saw them, and then we do the holy grail of all this. We give them the data back to take a look at it on their own. What that does, it proves confidence. They get much more comfortable with what you're doing, the exercise that you're running through. And then you do that with their entire file once you engage, and then you're off to the races. But that sequence of events, I think, is fairly standard at this point. I don't think any brand is going to give you the money that they're paying for this stuff in hopes that they're reaching right to the customer without having that validation point up front.
Anneka, because you also connect to so many downstream applications, is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same. The initial steps are definitely the same around testing, and the considerations around privacy and accuracy and reach are similar. What we see in addition to that is we have the slide up there that showed all the logos of all the marketing technology platforms out there. We see that a lot of them, especially the mid-market brands, have a hard time figuring out where to start with that diagram. It's like, I'm using all these platforms today, like how should I get started with onboarding and with identity resolution? And so a lot of what we try to advise them on is helping them pick of the 30 or 40 things they might be doing in marketing today, what are the platforms that are easiest to start with? And we'll start them out with Google, and we'll start them out with a DSP, or we'll start them out with social, something that's very simple and that they're already doing, and then broaden the use cases from there, because it's very, very easy to get overwhelmed by how much opportunity there is and how many different ways you can leverage your data to optimize your marketing. And sometimes what we see when we see clients fail, it's when they're trying to bite off way more than they can chew, and they're not able to actually execute on the vision of what they want to do, and they don't take the proper steps of, okay, try something small and then build on it from there.
So that's when their brains melt.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so with all of the positives that are occurring in this market, what's holding back faster adoption? We've seen this shift over the last couple of years from onboarding to identity, and where onboarding is now part of something bigger. There's still something holding it back. We're going to be in the 300s this year. The market's still growing really rapidly, but why isn't everybody doing this? And I'll start with Kevin.
Sure, I think I think there's two things holding this back. I think the first is honestly privacy. Like we have to, as an industry, do better at putting privacy first. In the EU, that's being sort of handed down, but for all of us who have global exposure, this is vital. The second is the reason the three of us are on this panel. It's difficult to talk about this stuff. It's too hard of a story. We need to figure out a simpler way to tell that story.
We have a thesis around this. It's called, if you want to do personalization, tied to the business outcome, there is, I want personalized engagement and experiences. In order to deliver that, I need to recognize people. Otherwise, I can't personalize. In order to recognize, I need to know who the hell they are. Paul?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I think on top of that, some of the challenges are not just the story, but are organizations ready to take advantage of identity resolution? And there are a lot of things that are standing in the way. One is sometimes just the org structure and org design. So if you have a business where your teams, your marketing teams are organized by individual channels or individual products, it makes it very difficult to think about and build capabilities around omni-channel marketing and really pulling your data together across all these different areas. So that's one thing that can stand in the way. And then another thing is, do you even have the right people? Actually, going back to the org structure thing, like where we see clients most successful is when they organize around the customer journey. So they're organizing around acquisition, or they're organizing around their existing customers, and then they're able to focus on the entire omni-channel, omni-product experience for each of those places in the customer journey. And then the second piece is really like, do you have the right people that understand data, understand how to use data for marketing, are focused beyond just the initial KPIs of click-through rates and cost per acquisition, and are starting to look at bigger engagement metrics and things that are really driving the business forward in the long run.
Yeah, we do a lot of data transformation, data strategy work, and it's start with, well, where is your data? And then you get this kind of deer in the headlights. And so there's this whole process of, can I find it? Is it in one database? Is it in 3 databases? Oh, there's the digital team, there's the media team, there's the CRM team. And they don't talk to each other. They're all competing for budget, they're competing for headcount. So these org issues are really big, but it's also the technology platforms. They were built for a different era. So there's a huge gap in the maturation and what they're going to need to really take advantage of this policy.
Yeah, mine's along the lines that you're saying. It's the early adopters are doing this, right? So the brands are sort of forging the path for everybody. And I think there's a lot of brands on the sidelines saying, let's see what happens. So I think the early adopters are in the game, and people are going to follow on. The second piece, I think, is cost. I mean, it's not cheap to do this, and a lot of brands haven't set aside that budget to get in the game and do this. And the third piece is market intelligence. I mean, the market the brand side, the client side is just not there yet to say how many benefits can they get out of identity resolution, onboarding, and being able to track that customer through the entire journey, do it successfully and accurately, and be confident in the results that you're going to get. So I think there's a little bit of timing issues here. I think over the course of the next 2-3 years, that's why I think we're at 450 this year. I think we're probably a little higher than that, my opinion. But to get to 1.2 billion, you're still tripling the market in 3 years. So the adoption is going to be much greater going forward.
Yeah, there's a tipping point. And there always is with technology adoption. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. And we happen to think that 18 and probably early 2019 is where this market's going to tip. And so we see rapid adoption. I think it's going to be more of a challenge globally with GDPR coming up. There's just a lot of hesitation to dive in when you're unsure of the privacy footing. Speaking of time, we are just about out of time. I'd like to open up to questions. I will start with Pam.
I feel like itching here. So first of all, I'd like to say 2.5 years ago, I give Bruce credit, because when he spoke here in January, 2.5 years ago, he said it has to be a top-down initiative to restructure the marketing teams and organizations, and it's not happening, as you mentioned. But you're talking about CRM a lot. What about acquisition? Where are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And Bruce, you mentioned the data management platforms at DMP.
Much less so on the brand side, where it's just too complicated for them to manage. Already, this whole thing is so complicated for them. I had a customer tell me, I feel like my job is being a plumber. I just put things together and I'm moving data around, and that's what my team does. And so I think it's too much complexity for most brands to handle, but for data providers, because they need the reach, that's fairly common.
Yeah, our research, and we called as we were writing the white paper and just talking to folks, most of the data providers out there are using waterfalling. They're waterfalling from one to the other. And look, there's only 5 companies. You have 3 of them here. Epsilon and Conversant is a little bit more of a closed environment. And then there's Neustar. That's it. There aren't 30 different onboarders out there, because as the panel said, this is hard to do. It's hard to build up that base file, to get that match, to get that resolution, not that management going. And so it's still a very limited market, and you need to waterfall.
If I can ask one other
Just
question.
let me follow up on and help you on that. Waterfalling is common, right? We all did it in the email space, and we understand it very well. And in this space, it is a should have. It's not a must have for everybody. And when it's a should have, I think the problems are twofold. It's getting the data that is not being matched from one of the providers and having them being able to give it to you in a transparent environment. Say, look, I didn't match this here. Go get somebody else. And that's kind of tough to do. Not only because it exposes everybody, but it also is a lot of work to get that out of the system. And there's a cost to doing that. The second piece is, I think from a waterfalling perspective, the platforms that you're sending duplicate data to. I think Blue Kai is probably one of the best, right? And taking disparate sources and overlapping them and coming up with a unique data set. A lot of them can't do that. So if you get data from all 3 of us and we're all matching at whatever our rates are, the uniqueness between each other needs to be sort of sorted out on the platform. I think there's still a lot of complications on that piece of it. But if you're able to get, from us, let's say we match you at 1%, we'll give you the 99% we didn't match you, and then you go bring it up to the other guys. I think that's the easiest way to do it, but I'm not sure that's the practical way.
Peter?
To that point, and I guess the secondary matching downstream that some of you have talked about, could you explain more about how the synchronization occurs? So if I waterfall from one company to another, then the matches that I obtain after that have to get joined together in some fashion or another. And similarly, there are so many other service providers out there. If I've onboarded with you and I want to take that to some other service provider, how am I going to sync up, and how do you keep that information as accurate as possible so I don't lose my investment on onboarding?
Who wants to grab that?
I'll jump on that. On that grenade. I think it's really, we have really struggled and emphasized the need to be agnostic in this space, and that's been very important to sort of who we are as a company. So we do onboard and fulfill to anyone else in the space. We don't. We're willing to work with everyone, and that's been very important because that's what's best for the customer. I think the other part of your question is how does this all come together? And in most cases, that is downstream of us, and that is the right question to ask because it's not. I think we all have opinions on how it should come together. But it's not something we are in charge of, and so there's almost certainly inefficiency being added to that spot.
And I think it's that complexity which is also holding back the market. All of a sudden you look and say, it looks like it's easy on one of those pretty PowerPoint pictures. The reality on the ground is not so easy. Last question.
Sorry, so I had a follow-up question on this, and that is the next generation of DMPs we're being told is consumer data platforms. So most of my clients are struggling to get any kind of an economic return on their DMP, and now they're being told to double down and go to a consumer data platform, which all of you would presumably have a significant stake in from a success standpoint.
I'll own this question. Because we are getting this question nonstop. What is a CDP? And a CDP could be at the data layer, so they are managing and absorbing data. They're taking first-party data, so they separate themselves from the DMP because they'll handle PII, but they're saying they can handle PII and non-PII in a still privacy-compliant way. But then they've thrown their application layer on top of that, their campaign management, et cetera. We have seen some work at scale. We have seen others where certain components work well, others do not work well. And if you are looking for flexibility, having a fully integrated end-to-end platform like that takes away some of your flexibility. And they are also not true marketing databases, though they will position themselves that way. So that is another issue. The term has gotten polluted. It's like the term CRM. It had a meaning once. CDP is going the same way. And even Dave Rabb, who's got the CDP Institute, has started to ask his readers, well, how should we redefine CDP? So it's created a lot of confusion in the marketplace.
Are you projecting success for CDPs?
I think that in the mid-market, there will be a place for them. I don't think that most of them are ready for prime time as fully integrated from the application layer through the data layer. And at the enterprise market, I don't think they're ready.
I just wanted to comment, I have 3 CDPs I'm deploying for clients in New York right now that are clients of 2 of the 3 of you. Sorry, well, it gets you after.
That's okay.
I'll get it. So my team is deploying 3 of them right now, and they are expecting that 2 of you, at least 2 of you, have all the answers on how to make their CDPs get them an economic return.
At the end of the day, the CDP is the application layer. That's where the economic return has to come from. This is the juice that makes it go. But ultimately, it's the analytics, the insight, and the leveraging of the applications that are going to make it work. So putting it back on Oracle or putting it back on LiveRamp is a bit steep, except for the fact that they do have a lot of market knowledge. All right. We are at the top of the hour. I want to thank all of you. I'd really like to thank my panelists for coming and for joining. What you have here are 3 of the people with the most experience in this market of digital data over the last 7 years. And so this was a great panel, and I learned, so I'm really happy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank Bruce Biegel and Samantha Braverman for bringing us. We just want to remind you that on October the 19th, if you can't get enough of data, we will be having our webinar sponsored and given by MediaMath, Data in the Digital Age, and also our sister organization, MCMA. If you really want to go back and do the people-to-people marketing, as Paul was suggesting, our sister organization, MCMA.org, the-mcma.org, on October 18th, will be holding a networking event down at LiveRamp, and that will be people-to-people marketing, so person-to-person marketing, which falls in with all of this. So thank you all for coming today and spending time with us. We really appreciate your support. See you soon.